I'm joined today by Rich Lowry, the editor of the National Review and author of The Case for Nationalism. Rich, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being in Mississippi.
Absolutely.
The state of American conservatism. Notionally, American conservatives are doing very well. They won the White House. They've done well in Congress. The Supreme Court full of Republican appointees. Is that the full picture? Is American conservatism in good shape?
Yeah, I'm reminded a little bit of the story Reagan used to tell about Brezhnev. Someone asked Brezhnev to summarize the state of the Soviet economy in one word, and Brezhnev said, good. And then the interviewer said, well, what would you say if you had more than one word? He said, not good. So I think it's mostly good, but it's a mixed bag. I think the conservative movement and the Republican Party are just dominated by Donald Trump, who's the most dominant political figure, I would say, we've had since FDR, and very much is in the mold of, given where we are in Jackson, Mississippi, of Andrew Jackson. A lot of the same complaints you hear about Trump were all made against Andrew Jackson, also a populist figure, a domineering personality. So much just depends on where Trump is on any given thing, and I think he overlaps 70, 80, you can argue about the percent, with kind of traditional conservatism on a lot of policy questions, but then he's different on a lot. I would say most consequentially tariffs. But then there's also the tendency for retaliatory lawfare, the not really caring very much whether legal niceties are honored, and on most of this there's a precedent for it. He's building on a precedent of what other presidents have done, both Republican and Democratic, but there's just a sheer just kind of not caring about the process and the rules, just given kind of what his
elevating
personality
the outcome
is.
over the
Yeah, and it's hard to make the case to people, right, that you should care about the process, because and very often it just gets in the way. But the Anglo-American tradition is based on process. Our liberty and our markets ultimately depend on process and rules. So those are very important. So I think tariffs and that tendency are what I've been most concerned about.
Is part of that ruthlessness, willing to use kind of any means and ignore legal niceties, is part of that perhaps the Conservatives catching up with what the left has done for years? Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, and I think that's the way most Republicans think of it. But I think it's that, but then it's also just Trump's personality, right? Impatient, a great sense of urgency, not willing to let anything get in his way, right? And so when he was in the real estate world, that might be not letting a union get in his way, or not letting the price of rebar get in his way, or zoning rules, or whatever it is. But now when he's president of the United States, very often, not entirely, but very often, what is in his way? Norms, kind of a word I come to hate because it's been weaponized against Trump, but then also the constitutional order. So I think what we've seen with Trump is an exaggerated version of what has been a problem with the basic dynamic of American governance for decades now. We have an overweening executive and then a legislative branch that hasn't wanted to protect its power and prerogatives, has actually affirmatively wanted to give them away in certain respects. That's the easy thing to do. You don't have responsibility for anything, and you just petition the president to do it. But James Madison would be shocked at this state of affairs, because one of the basic dynamics of the whole system was supposed to be every branch is jealous of its power, clashes with the other. Sometimes one branch is going to win more than the other, but that just one, which supposed to be the most important branch, right, in Article 1, is just kind of out of that game.
So there's a
shocking
dereliction of duty on the part of conservatives in the legislature to do their job.
Yeah, and not just conservatives, progressives as well. No one in Congress, they're all happy to let a president rule unilaterally as long as they get what they want, or think they're getting what they want, or it would be dangerous for them to stick up their head and say, no, this isn't the way to do it, even though I like what you're trying to do.
Or they spend their time sitting in their office figuring how to boost their social media following, rather than actually getting into the nitty-gritty business of making laws.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that, and I think I have a friend who worked in the White House. I think back in the Bush years, he was saying even then you'd have congressmen coming and petitioning the executive branch to do something, rather than building the case in Congress, or we're going to have a bill to do this, and actually write it into law. So when you get these two things, the abdication on the part of Congress, and a president who just loves the idea of being able to impose or threaten tariffs through social media. That's really created a overweening executive of the sort we've rarely experienced in American history.
But there's more of a success story, isn't there, when it comes to the Supreme Court? Am I right in thinking that there actually conservatives have been doing some good things?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the foremost conservative successes of the last 30 or 40 years. And it started very much from the ground up when you have the Federalist Society cultivating conservative lawyers at law schools, making the case for an originalist-based jurisprudence. Ed Meese, Attorney General in the Reagan years, began making this argument. It was considered crazy, out of his mind. And slowly, these law school students became lawyers, they became judges, and this tendency has now is dominant in the Supreme Court. I think it arguably is the court that we've had that has been most impressively doing its job based on the true meaning of the Constitution and laws, maybe throughout American history. I mean, this is truly a historic achievement. And you can see, like in free speech, the culture of free speech is very much in doubt in this country. Certainly is in doubt, the English-speaking world. What the Brits have been doing is totally insane. But you can't go that far here in this country because the understanding of the First Amendment is so robust on that court. So they're truly a bulwark of our liberties and of how the system is supposed to work. Now, whether the players actually take advantage of that or not is another question, but the court is definitely protecting the architecture of our constitutional order.
On the issue of tariffs, a few months ago, it dominated the headlines, and people who were in favor of free trade said, tariffs, it's going to be a disaster. Defenders of the tariffs at one time, I think, were claiming it was even going to help us close the deficit. The issue slightly faded into the background now, but would I be right in thinking that actually some of the longer-term economic consequences of tariffs are now beginning to be felt?
Yeah, so I think a couple things went on. There was a freak out about them that was probably hysterical and not quite justified. But on the other side of the ledger, the Liberation Day tariffs were insane. It would have been hugely damaging, and he backed off of those. Now, we still have tariffs much higher than they were than when he came in. Just for him personally, that's an enormous victory, because when he first descended the escalator in 2015, this was a core commitment of his. It ran against the grain of elite opinion in both parties, and he's managed to
Everyone scoffed at the idea.
Yeah, and he's managed to reorient our policy around it through the force of will. Now, I don't think it's a great policy. I think he was right about China when a lot of us were wrong, including I was wrong about China, and I admit that. But China is a special case. China, that China has cheated in some respects in a way that's very damaging to our national security doesn't justify hitting Japan with tariffs, or India, or South Korea, or any of these other countries.
Or the UK.
Or the UK,
where there's a trade surplus.
Yeah, and so I think what we've seen, they're more cautious than what we saw in Liberation Day, but that doesn't mean they're not having a damaging effect. We're going to ramify over time. Now, it's not what the tradable sector is like 15% of the economy, and this is a tax on part of that sector. So it doesn't mean it's going to sink the economy. But I do think it has costs, and it's a bit of an anchor on the economy, and it's going to dampen things at the margins when you really could have a true golden age if you had a kind of a comprehensive commitment to free market economics and a deregulatory approach and an AI boom that seems to be upon us. So the economy still could grow, but I think that the tariffs are a drag.
With AI and the opportunities that opens up, plus bountiful amounts of cheap energy that America is really taking advantage. I mean, Chris Wright doing a great job.
Yeah.
What other things would you recommend to conservative leaders that they could do to really seize this moment?
Well, I mean, a lot of what you've seen here in Mississippi. And, I think that the two conservative values that are both indispensable and at times are in tension with one another, but ultimately support one another, are freedom in order.
Mm-hmm.
So you need freedom to have a dynamic society,
Mm-hmm.
and we know through centuries of experience you get that through unleashing the market, right? So what you've done here with tax reform, flat tax, and now eliminating down the road the income tax, labor market reforms, unleashes human potential. So you need that, but you need the human capital and people with the qualities and the discipline to take advantage of that freedom. That's where the order comes in. So I think we could do much more still at the federal level to deregulate. I think the push for school choice is extremely important, because it doesn't matter how pro-growth your economic policy is. If your kids can't read, nothing's going to come of it. So, and then order also at the border. We've seen it. We need a law and order in our streets. We need a more orderly approach to the very important problem of the mentally ill who are deinstitutionalized, and we just let wander our streets to the detriment of the mentally ill people. We wouldn't do this with anyone else, right? If we let people with Alzheimer's wander around the streets, we'd say, what's become of us as a society?
But you'd feel compelled to do something about it.
Yeah, but we let schizophrenics do it for some reason. And then in the extreme cases, they commit horrible crimes. And even if they don't, they're creating a sense of disorder that's very harmful to society.
So that idea of freedom but order, I mean, I can see how that would inform good conservative policy on things like immigration. Instead of being a kind of complete free-for-all libertarian who says open the borders, the order strand would say, actually, it's incumbent upon us to control who comes in and make sure that the people who do come in are the people we want, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think that's a classic case. So the freedom part of it is people, very talented people, want to come here and can make our society better. So you don't want to totally eliminate or cut that off, but you want to control it in two senses. One, obviously, you just don't want people walking in illegally. Two, you want people that you have some assurance are going to thrive here and immediately contribute to our society, right? So we have access to all sorts of hugely talented people who want to come here. Why aren't we selecting for them rather than a system we have now that's overwhelmingly based on family reunification? Now, you want to have some element of that, but it means you're letting in people, in effect, who might be a high school graduate from Ecuador, and whatever problems we have in our schools here, the schools are much worse in Ecuador, so that means even less than it does here, just being a high school graduate. And then you're going to let in that person's family, and you never would have selected that person's family to come in isolation. So what Canada had, I emphasize had, because Justin Trudeau blew it up, and what the approach Australia's had, where you're selecting for qualities that assure people are going to thrive immediately, makes total sense to me. And it may be that the high school graduate from Ecuador in 3 generations, the grandchild or whatever is has a Harvard medical degree. Great. But why wouldn't you bring in someone who can get the Harvard medical degree, 3 years from now?
And with so many people around the world wanting to make their home in America, you can afford to be incredibly selective.
Absolutely.
And just make sure you don't allow too many Brits in.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm very struck as a Brit by how much policy and how much good policy happens at America at a state level. It's a story that isn't told as often as it should be. We tend to think of politics in America, particularly when we're outsiders looking in, as the White House, Congress. But I think it's fair to say there's been this phenomenal Southern success story over the past 30, 40 years. Certainly the South is now the biggest demographically. It's the fastest growing economically. Technology has shifted. Companies have famously moved from sort of California to Texas. Finance companies have moved famously from Connecticut and New York to Miami. Why do you think the South is doing particularly well?
I think good policy. And this is one of the genius of the American system, is that if we just had a uniform federal policy that controlled everything, it might be a little bit better than what some states are doing and kind of worse than other states are doing. But when you have federalism and you have a lot of running room for states to make their own way, you can have states that are doing much better than the national average, and places that are much more alluring than kind of the average state in America, and we've seen it. Florida and Texas. Now we're seeing Mississippi coming on in a big way, and it just makes a difference in people's lives. Right, that their communities can get better based on local and state decisions, and you can see what works and what doesn't, right? Your reading law, which has been such an amazing success, Florida did it first, right?
Yeah.
Worked in Florida, you do it. You've done it, and it's been very notable because everyone looked down on Mississippi in terms of education terms. And now you have places like California looking at Mississippi. Yeah. So that's a wonderful dynamic.
You get systems competition. I mean, I think a very good example is energy policy. Mm-hmm. You've got New Jersey, which has basically copied Europe. And is now having to import energy from Pennsylvania. You've got states like Mississippi, which have basically been yes to fossil fuel and nuclear. What other areas do you think, policy areas, do you think southern states have done particularly well in?
Well, you have school choice. Mississippi hasn't done it yet, but that was part of it. Florida became a leader in education reform, and the reading reforms we just talked about are part of it. School choice was a big part of it. At will employment and not being burdened by the extraordinary strictures and regulations that come with being a union state. And we saw this decades ago, right, with the car manufacturers beginning to come down here has been a huge element of it. And then limited government and market-based reforms generally. So you just do add those three things together, and that's going to make for a pretty dynamic environment.
Good. Well, fantastic. Rich, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the future of conservatism, and thank you for being in Mississippi.
Thanks for what you guys have done. It's been extraordinary, and you're leading the country in some important respects now. We want to see more of it. So I hope you're just getting started.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely.